Good morning, everyone, and thanks for making the time to join this Sustainability in Business webinar today. This series of webinars is organised through the St Albans Greener Together network. If you would like to join our network, please do so through the links on the screen. If you would like to be showcased in a future webinar, please also do get in touch. The network empowers and enables residents, community groups and businesses that operate in the district to come together to create a more environmentally sustainable future. We do this by creating networking opportunities, running webinar series and community discussion events. We encourage members to share their best practices, and we promote this on our website and on social media to help to share their knowledge. Currently, we are also running a One Action Together campaign to show the cumulative impact of everyone taking individual action. The focus of today is on decarbonising your business. We have Lawrence from the Carbon Trust and Peggy Lee from Everyone Active with us to share their expertise. Lawrence is a sector lead for transport and logistics at the Carbon Trust. In his role, he works with businesses of all sizes and geographies, helping corporations achieve their net zero goals and assisting startups in developing sustainable business models to create competitive advantage. He collaborates with innovation and acceleration teams to advance the mission of reaching net zero. Peggy Lee is the Group Sustainability Manager for Everyone Active and leads the implementation of the company's net zero strategy and sustainability initiatives. She brings extensive experience in advising senior management on environmental and sustainability subjects, particularly on net zero, climate risks and reporting, and has worked across various sectors, including energy, hospitality, property, food and beverage, water and waste management, as well as leisure. I'll now hand over to Lawrence from the Carbon Trust, who will lead the next section.
Thank you very much, Nicola. And as my slides bump into there we go into the webinar. So thank you very much for St Albans Council for inviting us to speak today. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Peggy as well on sort of their overall strategy. So it's just a quick, as Nicola said, I'm from the Carbon Trust, and our role at the Carbon Trust is to accelerate the decarbonisation of the global economy. And so with that, we're a team of consultants, and here our primary purpose is to talk about what is decarbonisation, give you an understanding of why it's important, why it's a key part of sustainability, and potentially, if you're a smaller organisation, why you might be getting particular questions being asked of you from your customers, be it both public or by private. So just to give you an idea of who we worked with before, so we've worked globally with some brands that hopefully you'll have seen in some cases, some sort of local to the UK, whilst others global or behind other brands. But yeah, we've worked across a lot of sectors, and so we're well versed in and speaking about this topic and understanding that every sector is different and everyone has their own challenges. And so to go through, I think it's always worth reminding us why we're here and why this webinar has been put together. So it's especially with the news that we hear and there's some potential political discourse from some countries, it's always worth reminding us sort of why that there is such an urgency, especially in the UK and in other countries, to decarbonise. And just as we put up on the slide here, the key goal is to reduce global warming, raising of average temperatures by below 1.5 if possible, and then obviously with Greece with even 1.5, we're seeing an increase of extreme heat, species loss, crop yields, all of these key things that affect how we live our daily lives, and it's expected to be in the UK and countries all around the world. So even with a 1.5, which is the sort of minimum bearable that we have, there's going to be a large change. We can expect large changes to how we live our lives. With that sort of that science in place, there are legally and globally binding agreements that have been put together. There is almost a unanimous acceptance of the Paris Climate Agreement, Paris Climate Agreement, which is setting the challenge to decarbonise the global economy, which is where it's all coming from. So this is where these targets that are being set across countries will be filtering down all the way globally through to businesses. How does the key question is how that works in practice. So then essentially everyone and every sector gets a carbon budget. And what's been mapped from the IPCC is a budget from now until 2050. And what that is it gives you, just like a household budget, an overall budget that you can spend every year to emit. And essentially every company, person has a budget and is part of that pie. And if we spend too much, basically our overall circle increases too high and we go beyond the bounds of what we can emit. Generally, that obviously still feels quite abstract, but how that's generally been put together is through the leading organization of the Science Based Targets Initiative. They set pathways for every sector of at what rate they need to decarbonize. Obviously, every business that you have it will be in a sector, if that be services or manufacturing or transport. And essentially, what this sets out is a curve of how your emissions will be tracked to decrease from now until 2050. The science-based target breaks that down into sort of 4 key areas, which is your near-term targets of reductions, your long-term target you're getting to net zero by 2050, how you can set about reducing your emissions from your value chain, which we'll go on to in a minute, and also about neutralization, so where you can't abate your emissions any further and you'll need to go outside of your value chain or your business to get to net zero. And to give you a quick example, this is just one example from now until 2050, so you can sort of set that out as a business may look at it. You have your sort of initial starting emissions in tons of CO2 a year, going down to almost zero by 2050, with that 10% expected to be taken from, the remaining 10% to be taken from hard to abate. And so, for example, be that carbon capture or other credit-based incentives. But essentially, the goal and what every large corporate has, and generally large corporates sign up to the science-based initiative, and generally that will drive their requirement to reduce their emissions. And as we say, that's all part of, it's not just their emissions, it's also their scope 3, i.e. their whole value chain emissions. So if you're a supplier to a larger company, or your direct customers, you'll have these questions being pushed down the value chain. And so we've used a couple of terms already around terms of tons of CO2e. What is the greenhouse gas? It's always just a quick recap. Tons of CO2e or equivalent is the summation of the greenhouse gas potential, i.e. how much it warms up the Earth over a period of 100 years, based on, and it's a summary of seven groups of chemicals, but it's translated and averaged out into CO2 equivalent. So it's the equivalent. So with any other gases, it's the equivalent of emitting 1 ton of CO2e. So it's just a simpler way of expressing it. How we then categorize your emissions of CO2e is shown by the graph. We split it into 3 main scopes. Scope 1 being your direct, which is your own burning of fuels or your own use of company vehicles. Your scope 2, which is your electricity, which is your indirect, which is generally electricity produced by other sources, but obviously now we're decarbonising, it can be your own production as well, and then transmission. And then scope 3, which is all of your purchased goods and services. And we split scope 3 into looking up the value chain, so up towards your the production of your final good, and downstream, so your downstream activities. So that's everything that happens post the manufacture or production of your service or good. As well, there's also a couple of other categories. So what we've got in there is a couple of examples. So the fuel and energy of the goods purchased, the waste generated in your operations, your business travel, all your other travel is put into your indirect upstream, and then downstream, as you'd expect, that's downstream distribution once the good has been produced. Also, any further processing that happens outside of your boundary of control, as well as any leased assets, and as well as investments. So investments as well have a CO2 emission, because your money put somewhere else is someone else burning that fuel, for example, to produce their product. It's all interconnected, which is why every part of the value chain needs to be part of it. So just moving through. So what generally happens is for most most companies, and I think this one is this one is sort of this one is an example from a supermarket. 90%, 70-90% of the value chain is outside of your direct control. So it's generally produced by someone that you purchase goods and services of, and that's from every company. So everyone is interlinked with their decarbonisation activities. So for example, as you say, what we've got is a couple of examples of products. So for example, with automotive, the downstream is really high, and that's because you're using a vehicle quite a lot, as opposed to the manufacturing. So for example, a vehicle can be running on the roads for 10, 15 years. That petrol being in use is counted as part of that downstream emission. Another is, for example, with dairy, a large amount of emissions, and you may have heard this from methane emissions from cows, and plastic products as well, large amount of upstream, because the forming of the plastic itself is quite easy, but the extraction from the earth, from oil and gas, and the reformation of that feedstock chemical is really high. So so that's why it's pulled up there. So there's always a story behind why these upstream and downstream emissions are so weighted in their way, but it's a very common factor that your scope 3 is generally larger than your own scope 1 and 2. And so this is sort of this is how we look at the categories if we're sort of assisting a company, and you can very much use this for your own records. Essentially how we break down the scope 1, the scope 2, and scope 3. So everything that you do as a company will have an emission associated with it, and all of them will be categorized into one of these above categories. And this is standardized generally across the world. There's been a sort of a very general consensus driven by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and it's been taken up globally that this is the way that you categorize your emissions. So you may get requests like this from suppliers, from your customers. Pardon me, 1 second, I've just got a quick cough. Pardon. So what does that mean? Then going on to this dramatic pause for one of the final slides. So what does it mean for companies locally? So global transition is going to impact everybody. Even if you're maybe not directly within a high energy sector, and we're seeing this a lot with the companies we work with, they are starting to ask questions on what are the actual, at the moment they're using secondary or academic emissions factors, but they are starting to push those requirements of understanding every company to understand their own emissions down the value chain, down their supply chain. So they want it. So even if you're not directly being asked to report to government or to science-based targets, there'll come a time when your customers for tenders or procurement may start to ask these questions, and you may have received them already. And then your scope. And then more commonly as well is you'll see how these, it's also worth asking how your product or your service is relevant in this future economy. Now, so that might affect different companies more than others. But for example, if you're a company that produces internal combustion engines, it is likely that you're going to have to either have a portfolio to shift over your product or understand how you move your business model away to other products that are part of what skills or what services you offer that are going to be part of a future economy. And obviously that will change globally. And the other side of it is also what you can say about the claims that you have. So for example, the UK is generally mapping for some advertising claims that you can have around your business. So it's very key to be part of that, those policy requirements that are coming out of both the UK and Europe of how you market your goods, what claims you have. Certain terms around green or good for the environment are things that have been cracked down on. So it's always worth bearing that in mind. So staying up to date with these standards is really key for any business. And it's also understanding how your customers' needs will change as well. Yes, for small medium enterprises, again, you don't have the mandatory requirements, But again, your products, again, your customers are going to be dealing with, for example, high cost of living, or increased costs of electricity, and both of these come in from an efficiency and decarbonisation standpoint. So they're all key factors that are really useful to understand how you see your business from not just a financial lens, but also using this emissions and sustainability lens as well to position yourself as a key part of the future economy. And actually, this is a great segue over to Peggy, who's actually got a real case study of talking through this sort of sustainability reporting and through her business. So if I can hand over to you, Peggy, that would be fantastic. Take the reins.
Yes, thank you very much, Lawrence. And thank you, St Albans Greener Together, for inviting me to share this case study of Everyone Active in terms of our journey to decarbonize our portfolio. So apparently I have shared screen, but if you don't mind, I'll just try to share again because there will be a video. I just need to put the audio on just to make sure that it will be working down the line. I'm sure that you can see my screen now. So let me quickly introduce Everyone Active. We are a leisure center operator for a majority of our locations are operating on behalf or as an agent of local authority partners. We operate over 230 leisure centers or cultural venues across the UK with over 65 local authorities. And I am Peggy, the Group Sustainability Manager of the company. We have developed our sustainability strategy about 3 years ago, and my role is to lead on to the implementation of our sustainability and net zero strategy to decarbonize the company's operation, as well as supporting our local authority partners in doing so, because apparently it needs to be a collaborative effort rather than doing it just on our own. So we have launched our own net zero strategy 3 years ago. There are 3 key elements to it. Is to decarbonize our own head office, which is our support hub building. This is already completed by end of last year. So our support hub building is right now running on 100% renewable electricity without any gas, having solar PVs on the rooftop, as well as having EV chargers to support a greener and more sustainable mode of travel. Second pillar of it is to decarbonize our corporate operations by 2030. In terms of our corporate operations, this is basically what Lawrence have mentioned in terms of our activities, and many of those are actually relevant to the Scope 3 emissions of our own business. And the biggest part, which is the third pillar, is to operate our leisure facilities, which is owned by our local authority partners, to make it an operationally net zero building. And this is the biggest part of it because there are a lot of emissions that comes from the leisure center building itself. As a company, we have our ISO 14001 certification as well to support a more systematic way of implementing, as well as in terms of governance of sustainability, as well as net zero strategy. And net zero is at the heart of our business. It's part of the board agenda, and we see it very seriously in terms of making sure that we implement what we mentioned in our net zero strategy. And our strategy has been shortlisted in the UK Green Business Award as well as the Energy Awards last year. And to me, in terms of decarbonizing, no matter which business, climate change to me is definitely relevant to all business, no matter it's big or small, and it's actually relevant to each and every individual, like in our life, rather than having, talking about your work environment or business. It's really crucial to make sure that we address climate change or decarbonize proactively now if we haven't taken any action, or if you have already taken action, is to take more proactive actions now rather than waiting for it to come later on. And to me, it is very crucial for any business to make sure that you stay relevant as well as you stay competitive in terms of addressing climate change and to decarbonize. And there's a table or a chart, which is from the World Economic Forum. This one on the slide is actually from the 2023 Global Risk Report. Just look at the color code on the 10 years. All the green are environmental related subjects or top 10 risks. And there are 6 which is environmental related, and climate change as well as biodiversity, which are really relevant to climate change, are on the list. This is 23. If I look at 24, it stays basically the same. When you look at the amount of green environmental related altogether with the other topics, it's still very important. And also in the latest 25, extreme weather events, biodiversity, climate change, natural resources, shortages, as well as pollution. These are the biggest, and it is basically half of the top 10 risks over from an international organization, World Economic Forum. So this is kind of the scale, as well as the persistence in terms of the importance of addressing climate change and to decarbonize. And just a little bit of an echo to what Lawrence just mentioned as well. Well, if we imagine our carbon footprint, this is not business. This is relevant to our own daily lives. On average, the UK's average carbon footprint for 25 is 8.4 tons per person, and the world average is 6.3. Apparently, there's a lot of improvements that we could add now. And imagine the volume of 1 ton of carbon is definitely bigger than a detached. Or if I make it relevant to our leisure center, it's basically a ton of carbon is roughly the size of an Olympian size 25-meter swimming pool. So this is actually big. You have already seen this Scope 1, Scope 2, as well as Scope 3 chart. But what I'm trying to do here is to map that against everyone active as a public sector leisure center operators operation. Scope 1 is our natural gas for heating, which contributes to over 70% when compared against natural gas together with any other fuel like electricity or fuel for vehicles. It is over 70% of the total energy used. Refrigerants for air conditioning, company vehicles as well. Scope 2 will be a majority, will be electricity used from the grid. And Scope 3, which is for all the business, it will usually be the biggest. To us, it's almost all the upstream as well as downstream activities. You could imagine all the business travels, etc., as well as the customers' travels to and from our centers to use our leisure facilities or cultural facilities. And also the end of life of products. So, for example, if we have we have some recyclable or reusable cups sold to the customer, when the customers treat that, then that is actually part of the end of life treatment of our product. So, and of course, our own operations, waste treatment, etc., they are all relevant on top of the very obvious energy use. And just to give you an idea, I've mentioned we have 230 leisure and cultural centers. For a leisure center, on average, it's about 319 tons of carbon CO2 carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. For golf, there are about 4 tons per course. For theaters, there could be about 50 tons per theater. And in the St Albans area, we actually operate leisure centers. We have a golf as well as theaters as well. So this is how it looks like in terms of the relevance in terms of carbon emissions. And I'm going to show you what we are doing now in terms of reducing and decarbonizing. And I'm just going to share a video about 2.5 minutes to give you a very quick summary. I hope the audio will work okay. I hope this gives you a quick overview in terms of what we are doing as a corporation. But apparently, what I'm going to do is to quickly talk through what exactly are those elements that I've shown in the video. So in terms of approaching to reducing energy or decarbonizing, we look at it as a whole building because it's not only about, changing a light bulb to an LED or put on a pool cover. There are many more elements to it. There are three main areas. First is to use less energy as well as water. That we go through behavioral changes. We have carbon reduction coordinators at each and every site of ours to do site walks together with our general manager and the management team. The quicker wins will be LED lighting and PIR sensors, building management systems, pool covers, and even some building installations. Renewable energy is the second biggest part to increase electricity that is generating on site, or to reduce the carbon emissions that is generated from the use of energy or electricity. So solar PVs or solar thermal generating heat, EV charging points, which provides 100% renewable electricity. These are the things, as well as more efficient and low carbon technology. For example, heat pumps, no matter it's air source or ground source, district heat networks, which many of the local district councils may be taking forward as a council initiative, as well as any other emerging interventions or technologies that is emerging through. We look at that proactively, evaluate the emerging technologies and innovations so we could pilot and make sure that we could achieve win-win together with other organizations to make decarbonization working for everyone. Because apparently our Scope 1 and 2 emissions will be another organization, for example, our local authority partners, Scope 3 emissions. And to me, this is very important that drive each and everyone to work together, no matter your supplier or working with your own supplier. So this is important. And how we do this will be first is to engage our colleagues as well as customers to build the capacity, awareness to make it work, supporting our local authority partners to work together with us to decarbonize the building where we are operating, but the building is owned by the local authority. Collaboration with industry bodies or any other organizations for advocacy is another area, as well as partnership with specific consultants who have expertise in terms of bringing the project to life in terms of from design to construction. And we have a net zero strategy tagline, which is everyone is reducing carbon. To me, it's really everyone is reducing the carbon together rather than, well, it will be sitting on the business. It's really the business driving that together with all the colleagues, all the customers, as well as all stakeholders together. We have four key areas. Energy, apparently, this is the biggest one in terms of carbon emissions. Water is important as well. And if you imagine waste generation, there will be emissions from the treatment as well as transportation of it or any of the goods. And that is why recycling as well as green travel are actually all well relevant to decarbonizing. And we build capacity for colleagues to understand the importance and what changes they could make in their own day-to-day work. We have many different kinds of trainings. We have carbon reduction coordinators, league tables to show, it's kind of a competition how you could get to the top of the league table and share the experience internally. Of course, there will be tools like energy portal as well as waste management portals, so performance will be visible to all our colleagues and all our centers. Customer engagement, I suppose, is easiest to talk through by our colleagues as well as using some poster messages. Our website as well, we do customer survey in terms of how we could support our customers to travel to our center in the greener mode, no matter it's cycling or walk, using public transportation or car sharing. Waste and responsible use of resources is another big area that I would encourage all business not to forget about anything relevant to waste generation or actually waste management. waste avoidance is most important. First, from the first place, avoid that from generating, so there's no hustles in terms of creating carbon emissions, environmental impact, as well as treating that. That is also the element of responsible use of resources as well. And to us, as everyone active, all our waste are diverted away from landfill. So there won't be any carbon emissions generated from the landfill. But apparently there will still be carbon emissions generated from the treatment of it. So reduction is key. It's not only about the easiest or the simplest dry mix recycling like plastic bottles or cans, etc. But it's about batteries, IT equipment, delivery pallets, or even jogging or running shoes that we are trying to use different suppliers as well as channels to make use of them, no matter it's reusing or recycling that. And we also encourage our customers not to use single-use containers, no matter it's single-use plastic or single-use paper cup. And we offer discounts for them to buy off our drinks using a reusable container for that. We work together with our suppliers for the whole value chain to manage our carbon emissions as well as theirs. So we work with our key suppliers, which they also have very strong sustainability credentials. We look at it together as part of our due diligence in terms of supply evaluation. So this is how we do that. And what I'm just going to show is perhaps just a quick summary in terms of what we are doing in terms of working together with our local authorities is to support them in applying for government funding to make investments for bigger decarbonization projects, and also some funding for solar PV, which recently is the swimming pool support from which is managed by Sport England. And as I mentioned, local authorities sharing as well as advocacy is important as well. And other industry bodies, no matter it's UK Active, Sport England, or Net Zero Hubs, through these is really the sharing as well as working together with all the different partners are all important. So I guess I'll just stop my sharing here and hand the time back to Nicola.
Thank you very much for that. So I think we'll just see if there's any questions in the chat. Doesn't look like there are too many at the moment. If you do have a question, please do drop one in. But I've actually, in the meantime, Peggy, I had a sort of a quick question for you. Thank you so much for sharing that sort of very thorough decarbonisation strategy, and it did cover also two quite other important pieces around energy and waste. Did you, and it was noticed in a couple of the in the couple of the interviews that you had, do you see yourself working quite a lot with the efficiency gains? Do you see sort of any savings, like financial savings? Do you sort of see financial savings in some of the works that you do? And it's probably quite useful to share with maybe some of the smaller, like, have you seen any big savings from that?
Oh, sure. Actually, I guess what would be a very obvious and relevant answer to that, for example, LED lighting, it will be a very relatively quick return on investment that will generate fast energy saving and carbon emissions reduction. But more importantly is the financial savings through the reduction of the electricity use. This is one of the easiest savings, and it will be applicable to many business. And the other biggest savings, if you picked up from my presentation, because we have swimming pools, so natural gas used for heating up the water for a swimming pool is actually quite a lot. It will be 70%. So to decarbonize the gas boiler, it will be the most obvious technology right now will be heat pumps. In terms of the tariff cost, comparing gas versus electricity, electricity is definitely not cheap as compared to gas in terms of the electricity tariff rate. but the heat pump is actually a much more efficient technology. In the short term, it might not be something that we as the operator will be able to take forward directly. And this is the element of working and collaborating together with our local authority partners to look for funding resources to make that business case work. So I guess some of the initiative, it will be very quick, very straightforward, that one business could just take forward directly on your own. And for big investments, I guess what I'm saying here is collaboration as well as working together is important to make sure that all the elements are discussed and make sure that there will be a business case, which otherwise is not possible for any single business to take forward.
I suppose the other piece, thank you so much for the answer. I think that's the other piece from it as well, especially when you talk about heat pumps, is, as you say, is the longer term view. I think it's if you assume as we switch to more renewables and move away from natural gas, it's more likely that electricity supply is going to become cheaper. But from that as well, so I suppose it's taking the long view rather than the short term
Exactly
view.
that.
No, I think that's really helpful. I think I suppose from a small business point of view, I suppose you as you say, it's sort of there's also the quick wins from an efficiency point of view. And you've noticed a couple of them there. You're in a position where you sort of own your facilities. Have you got any sort of longer term pieces that you're sort of that are going to take a little bit harder, but you're sort of working towards at the moment? So sort of like the longer term decarbonisation work.
Right. So, well, apparently to our business model, because we do not actually own any of the leisure center buildings ourselves. So, in the longer run, as I mentioned, we have a net zero strategy targeting 2030 as the target year, or to work alongside the local authority partners' net zero ambition. So, I guess in the relatively longer term, the journey will be to engage all the local authorities and work out a pathway together, starting from now, to understand what might be the possible scenario and work alongside together to reach the longer term goal of reducing carbon and eventually reaching net zero together to meet our own as well as our local authority partners' decarbonisation target.
No, thank you very much. So in the meantime, we haven't seen any other questions in the chat. So I think what we'll do is just to quickly summarise. Thank you so much, Peggy. I think it was quite a nice sort of back and forth that we had, where sort of setting up the scene, and then you had some really detailed pieces, and we heard quite nicely sort of how it can make a business. It affects the financial services, your business, the decarbonisation strategy, the efficiency savings that we heard from the video. I think sort of, and as you heard, sort of working with the other points that were pulled out around working with your supply chain, I think they're both incredibly important. And I think looking alongside your other businesses and up and down your value chain of who's likely going to be asking these questions about the products and services that you use is another key one to think of. But yeah, I think the more and more, and this really set it out as well, is it's not so much sustainability is not an alternative thing anymore. It's very much how you continue to do business and the economy going forward. And so I think it's sort of, and these transitional pieces and what the big investments that you're making now, for example, with the heat pumps and the solar panels is all part of that. So I think those are probably my big takeaways from this, of sort of how sort of long-term planning and understanding and collaboration are really, really key. But from my side, I think that's probably a good place. And unless Nicola, you had any other final thoughts before we close the webinar?
Yes, no, I'd just like to say very much thank you to you both for being able to be here today and do your presentations. It's been really helpful. I know there are a lot of businesses across the district that I'm sure can find this information helpful for them, and we're going to share the link for this recording on our website, so you can look out for that. So if you would, I would like to say again, if you'd like to get in touch with our network, please do. And if you are interested in being involved in a future webinar, do also let us know. We are always looking for different case studies to promote on our website and social media, and it helps the whole St Albans Greener Together network grow and move forward. So we'll bring this webinar to a close. There is another one coming up next week, and so hopefully some of you can join us there. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.